Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen and Pop Culture. And the next in the little series of videos I've been doing, looking at the roots of different comic book characters, we look at the first year of stories and see, well, what kind of character is established, the world building they do, and maybe how it differs from how we would come to see the character years later. It seems like a great time to do the first superhero, Superman, starting, of course, in Action Comics #1 from June of 1938. Now we have a new Superman movie releasing, and one of the questions, of course, is, well, what kind of Superman are we going to be seeing on the screen? A lot of people think of Superman as, it's been described as the big blue Boy Scout. Might be surprised, though, in Superman Year 1, of what kind of character he is. Maybe a little bit different than you're used to. So let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to run through the first 12 issues of Action Comics. See what we get. Well, here's our first page of the first Superman story, where they basically catch you up on who this character is and how he came to be. And so imagine we're looking at the first superhero in comic books ever, and he gets a single page for his origin. Now, of course, the origin will be padded out over the years, but to begin with, this is all you get. And this is, for a lot of readers, this is a brand new concept in characters, although Philip Wylie's Gladiator, published some years earlier, had a very similar character. That was in prose, and maybe not as happy a story ultimately as Superman came to be. But this is a pretty new concept. It doesn't get even a whole issue to describe in detail his origin. Back in the day, the story of these characters was not a narrative running from a beginning to an end, which is what we oftentimes get in modern comics. They were timeless, episodes in a never-ending now. The point of it was the character and throwing the character into different situations, seeing how he would react, how he would overcome, how he would triumph. So, we really begin here. Superman on the job, saving a woman's life, and then heading off to see the governor. The governor of what state? Well, we'll see that in a moment, to prevent an innocent man from being put to death. And here's our first key to the original Superman's personality. He kind of considers himself above the law. Superman, well, he's sort of like a bully with a heart of gold, but he really does rely on his own judgment. If he thinks it's right, he's going to make it happen no matter what. Somewhat different from the Law and Order character that we would get in later years. If he thinks the cause is good, then whatever it takes to get there is okay with him. And next we see Superman is successful in preventing that execution. And then we meet Superman's alter identity, Clark Kent. So right off the bat, we got Superman, we got Clark Kent, and we get the newspaper that he works for, the Daily Star. Yes, the Daily Star. He's not working for the Daily Planet just yet. And by the way, don't expect to see Metropolis real soon either. And he is given the task by his editor, who doesn't have a name right off the bat, of covering this new sensation, Superman. Now, two things I noticed right off. The art is much better in these early Superman comics than in the early Batman comics. I did do a Batman Year 1 retrospective on this channel. You could check that out. Within a couple pages, we meet Lois Lane, which sets the tone for their relationship immediately. Clark wants a date. Lois decides to take pity on him and then despises his weakness when a thug wants to cut in on them while they're dancing. All right, now, so right off the bat, this is key to any incarnation of Superman that you really want to do, because here we are just a few pages in to the very first story. You have Clark, Lois, Superman, in a sort of love triangle. That is just absolutely key. If you're taking that out, you might be making a mistake. You're kind of knocking out one of the most absolutely key pieces of the Superman mythology there is. It is one of the driving forces of the character, of the conflict, of the complications, right there, right off the bat. You do not get world building in early Superman quite the way you did in early Batman. But what you do get is extremely important. Now, that thug that we were just talking about a moment ago, Butch, doesn't take kindly to Lois's smack, so he and his boys rush out and kidnap her. This leads directly to the scene we saw on the very famous cover of Action Comics #1, Superman tossing Butch's car and then hanging him up on a telephone pole. No, not like hanged, just sets him up there for safekeeping. And this leads to Lois's first meeting with Superman, and I think this is an absolutely fantastic panel. I love the poses. I love the colors. Just wonderful. You needn't be afraid of me. I won't harm you. That's fantastic. And again, if you're doing anything with Superman, especially if you're looking at the very early years, you really should have something like this panel show up fairly early. So, Flash, a new storyline. Yeah, that quick. There's a war brewing in a South American republic, and the editor wants Clark to run down who's behind it, which sends Clark to Washington, D.C. on the lookout for political corruption. So far in this issue, we've seen him save an innocent woman. He's dealt with a bully, and now he's going after political corruption. We often think of Batman as being a street-level hero compared to Superman, who takes on cosmic menaces. But in the early years, in Batman's first year, he's fighting vampires, werewolves, a mad scientist who makes like giant humans, a guy in a dirigible raining death down upon New York City. And in Superman's first year, well, he's taking on exactly the kind of stuff you would expect a street-level hero to take on. Some of that is because Superman is a bit of a fantasy for the people making this comic. Wouldn't it be great if there was somebody strong enough to deal with all of these things that we have to deal with in our life, all these things that make life a little less pleasant for all of us? That's what they're kind of doing here with Superman. You're not going to get Superman taking on supervillains for a little while in the series, and you're not really going to get that at all in his first year. We also see here one of Superman's favorite tactics when he's dealing with people, and that is scaring the crap out of them until they spill with the information he wants. Again, something that now would be more in tune with Batman, sort of like holding somebody over a ledge, you better talk. That's Superman right off the bat. So the characters of Superman and Batman, the people's perceptions of them, especially in, say, 2025, kind of reversed in 1938, 1939. Well, the story in Action Comics #1 ends pretty much at that point, and we get an ad to watch Action Comics for more Superman. So for context, the other stories in this book involve H. Fleming's Chuck Dawson, a Western, Fred Gardner's Zatara, the Magician, yeah, that's Zatanna's dad, Sticky Mitt Stimson by Alger, a comedy piece with a really, really good comic art, The Adventures of Marco Polo by Sven Elven, Pep Morgan, also by Gardner, Scoop Scanlon by Will Ely, Tex Thompson by Bernard Bailey, who also would go on to create The Spectre and Our Man. But you see, Superman is a very, very different character from all the other characters you're getting in this book. They are very traditional action-adventure characters from the time. Tough-talking guys, and you get a little comedy. It's one of the great things about Golden Age comic books, too. Multiple stories. You'd always get a little bit of variety. You'd get a little comedy thrown in there, some comic strips. In fact, even into the 1960s, you'll see it like a little comedy piece on a page in a book. So anyway, but that's just a little context, though, for what else you're getting in Action Comics at this time. Well, let's move on to Action Comics number 2. You notice Superman is not on the cover. He's not quite there yet. The Superman from the story continues from last issue. Supes discovers that Emile Morvell, the munitions magnate, is trying to encourage the South American War. So the idea here is you have these war profiteers trying to make trouble in the world. Superman back in the 30s is very much a character of his time. And there's definitely I guess you could just call it sort of not a political bias, at least a particular point of view that Shuster and Siegel have in what they write for the character. Well, Superman catches up to Morvell and tells him to be on the ship for San Monte. That's one of the countries involved in this war, which leads to Clark Kent and Lois Lane heading down to the war zone to cover it for the Daily Star, and a chance for Superman to end the hostilities. Along with them, we see Morvell, who heeded Superman's commands, a mysterious beauty named Lolo Cortez, and a bunch of thugs. Now, the thugs are paid to get rid of Superman, and they try to throw him overboard. It doesn't work, and he gives them a damn good thrashing. When Superman catches up to Morvell, he tells him he won't get the same if he enlists in the San Monte army. So he's going to make the war profiteer actually fight a war. And you see, once again, very much of the time, if these guys had to do the fighting, then we wouldn't have wars. I don't know if that's true or not exactly, but we think it's true, and they certainly thought it was true. And that's what we get here. So Superman sneaks into the enemy camp, and he snaps an amazing war picture. And by the way, the takeaway here is he sends it back to the evening news. Well, what about the Daily Star? It's in flux. It's a little bit in flux at this point. But he sends it back to the evening news in Cleveland, Ohio. That is initially the city that Superman operates in. You would also have to assume Smallville, which at this point doesn't really exist, would have also been in rural Ohio. So nowadays, Kansas and Metropolis is a New York stand-in. Back in the day, Cleveland, Ohio. And so a new but connected storyline begins as Lola Cortez, a spy, incriminates Lois Lane. And Lois Lane, as a result, is sentenced to death. But of course, Superman is not going to put up with that. He rescues her. And this is a key theme of early Superman: justice over the law. In other words, yes, the law says, that we have a trial for Lois Lane, and she's found guilty, and she is sentenced to death, and therefore she must be put to death. But Superman knows that's bogus. That is not just. The trial was bogus, etc. He's for justice regardless of what the law says. And he's strong enough, he's invulnerable enough that he can push it. He can do these things. Big theme in the early books. But remember, this is justice as Superman sees it. And you'll see in later issues, this can get a little bit cloudy. In many ways, like I said, Golden Age Superman is more of a vigilante than Batman, at least in the beginning. And here we see Superman intentionally killing an enemy, a torturer. There's a death toll in early Batman, but for the most part, it's not intentional. Superman has no problem here. He throws that man far enough that he almost certainly would die when he lands or hits a tree or what have you. So this is not the Superman a lot of people think of in 2025 when they think about Superman. Ultimately, Superman ends the war by forcing the two leaders to have a fist fight, which they do not want to do because they're not angry at one another. Well, then why are your armies fighting? Well, that's when they realize they've been manipulated by arms makers into going into war. And so the war doesn't happen at all. Kind of a cool resolution. It's not him coming in and beating everybody. I mean, he does a little beating up of people, but it's him sort of showing there's no reason to have this war in the first place. Why don't you just cut it out? All right. Action Comics number 3, August of 1938. Again, Superman is not on the cover. Now, in this issue, Superman heads off to save a miner trapped in a collapsed coal mine. And I bet I know why it collapsed. Well, we'll see. So as Clark Kent, he pretends to slip into the mine accidentally. So we got sort of the Clark Kent being clumsy idea, but it's basically a way for him to get away from prying eyes so he can do what he needs to do. Well, once he gets down there, he detects poison gas. He finds the rescue party, and he sends them up to safety on the little elevator contraption. He then gets the trapped miner out, although that man will be maimed for life. Visiting him in the hospital, he discovers that the accident could have been prevented. They've warned the foreman, and he ignored them. We're going to see this kind of storyline, corrupt business interests, especially when it comes to mining, right on in through like the 1980s. And it is based on, of course, a certain amount of reality. Things like that did happen. Well, naturally, the mine owner is a fat cat who won't give the man a pension and won't admit to dangerous conditions. So we've dealt with a wrongly accused woman. We've dealt with a gangster who's a bully. We've dealt with a war profiteer. Now we're dealing with a business magnate who is himself kind of corrupt, kind of greedy. You know, you get the idea. Again, this is the 1930s. This is what's on people's minds. And if you understand and study the 30s, you'll see the political ramifications of a lot of this stuff too. These comics can be a good insight into the thinking of the day. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean everything people thought and that shows up in these books is 100% correct, but it does show what people were thinking. Gives you some stuff you could follow up on if you're studying these periods in time. So Superman decides to spy on a party that the mine owner, Blakely, is having, disguised as a miner. He's caught, as he intended to be, and threatened, but the mine owner lets him in for a gag. The mine owner mocks the partygoers as a bunch of bored layabouts and decides, let's finish the party down in the mine. And of course, once they're down there, Superman causes a cave-in, which honestly could have killed someone. Important to understand, at this point in Superman's history, he's not the guy who can move at the speed of light, or, well, faster than the speed of light, and sort of make sure that nobody's going to get hurt when he does something like this. He didn't know, and you get the feeling he maybe didn't care, or maybe he's just not that careful with his powers at this point. This has something to do, of course, with the writers being young and kind of new to all this. But in a story context, you can look at it as a superpowered human who's trying to figure out just what he can do. And so sometimes maybe he's not as careful as he should be. So here's where Blakely learns that his mine has no safety devices. His partygoers want to kill him, and the miner, really Clark Kent, refuses to dig them out. So the fancy people have to grab picks and shovels. And Blakely soon swears he's learned his lesson. So when they all tire out and fall asleep, Superman digs them out. And we get a reformed fat cat and a happy ending. All right, so it's not all just about revenge, but there is a certain amount of punishment. Let's see how you like it. Action Comics number 4, September of 1938. Still no more Superman on the cover. The story in this one begins with a hit and run and Superman chasing down the perp. His car stalls on a railroad track and Superman pulls him out, but not before the man dies from a heart attack. This leads Superman to overhearing some cheating on football games. Okay, corruption. Again, corruption, the big thing Superman's going after. A corrupt society, or at least the corrupt elements of society, whether they're high or whether they're low. So Coach Randall of Dale University hires a couple ringers for a game against Cordell. This was actually very common in early days of college football, hiring pros who were ringers. Superman decides to go undercover as a Cordell football player. By the way, it's probably Yale and Cornell is the idea behind these. Tommy Burke. So Burke has his own troubles. His girlfriend is leaving him because he's a bench warmer. So with some gentle persuasion involving a hypodermic needle, Superman convinces Burke to go along with this switcheroo. I'll take your place. He soon surprises the other players with, well, his resiliency. You see him getting slugged in the stomach and just taking it. So Burke becomes a starter now, and this provokes the bad guys to try to kidnap the real Burke. Superman follows and decides to let them keep him so he's not in the way. Not terribly heroic, but, works for Superman's overall plan. And of course, it all comes down to the big game. Coach Randall ignores a threat from Burke to discharge the ringers or be exposed. Superman just can't be stopped on the field. Something very similar to this, although much more dramatic and impactful, happens in Philip Wylie's Gladiator, and actually in the very first Flash story. You see Flash run out there when he just first gets his powers and does a real number on the football field. So at the very end of the game, Superman lets the real Burke substitute for him, so Burke can be the hero for his girlfriend also. Dig these instructions on weightlifting. They did this in some of the early Action comics about how you can become a Superman. Okay, maybe not quite Superman, but so lifting things heavier and heavier. They do some, I think, on vision. They don't do anything on about, stopping bullets with your chest. That was probably for the best. Action Comics number 5, October of 1938. Still no Superman on the cover. The Valley Ho Dam is going to burst. Get me, Clark Kent. But Lois asks, why not me? Because, Lois, this is no job for a girl. Jeez, what are you thinking? Okay, hold on. Strangely enough, Lois does not take this rejection lying down. She intercepts Clark and sends him off to cover a story about septuplets so she can get the big story. So here we go. Early on, we're in issue number 5. That is classic Lois Lane. But she is not an ace reporter quite yet. She's angling for it. Well, it doesn't go well for Clark. His editor fires him for falling for the trick. So this looks like a job for Superman. We get a montage of Superman in action faster than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings with a single bound. You get the idea here. And he stops a bridge from collapsing and killing everyone on that train right there, including Lois. When Lois arrives at Valley Ho, she makes for the dam. Superman is already there trying to keep it from failing. Well, naturally, the dam gives as Lois is driving up, and Superman has to save her. So Lois rewards him with a kiss. Wow, what a kiss. That's great. And that moment with Superman is followed by this moment with Clark. Who cares? The spineless worm. I can hardly bear looking at him after being in the arms of a real He-Man. Boom. The love triangle is firmly established here. Poor Clark can't tell the woman he loves that he's really Superman, and that's the only one the woman he loves has eyes for. Classic stuff. Take that out of Superman, and you are losing a very key part of the Superman mythos, the Superman story. Action Comics number 6, November of 1938. This is a goodie, as Clark Kent is introduced to Superman's personal manager, Nick Williams. An ingenious concept here. Since nobody knows who Superman is, this guy decides to cash in and license his image. Siegel and Shuster won't be laughing about this concept for long, of course, because it's kind of exactly what National Comics is going to do. Well, at any rate, this guy is not joking. Superman promoting gasoline, Superman promoting automobiles, there's all sorts of stuff like this. So Williams offers to let Clark actually meet Superman that night, and Lois is informed by the copy boy about this meeting. So she pretends to like Clark so she can get in on the action. The original Mean Girl. But Clark isn't fooled. So they hit a nightclub that night, and the singer sings a new song about Superman. You're a Superman. I think early Batman was a little bit better at world building, but I really do like this quite a lot. When you crush me in your arms, I must reveal I'm only flesh and blood and not resistless steel. That's fantastic. Somebody needs to create that entire song and put that in a movie. That would be wonderful. Well, Lois takes things up a notch in her quest for scoops and for Superman by drugging Clark's drink when he's not looking so she can take his place. She slips Clark Kent a Mickey. Naturally, Lois is unconvinced by the fake Superman she goes to meet. and wisely announces to them that she's going to reveal to the world that he's a fake. That is so often done in movies and TV and books, etc. You tell the bad guys to their face what you're going to do. Let me help you out in real life. If you're ever in a situation like this, just smile and go along with it. And when you get out of there, then you sneak off to the police and tell them what you know. Don't threaten. Don't challenge. It's a bad idea. Well, this results in rapid defenestration for Lois Lane. That's a fancy word for being thrown out the window. Got her. You've got me. Who's got you? Oh, well, okay, she doesn't say that, but you could see, very much like the 1978 movie when Superman first saves Lois from falling to her death. And no surprise, Superman captures the bad guys and leaps off to prison. There's a bit in one of the Fleischer cartoons very reminiscent of this, where he grabs some people and literally jumps to a jail. So you could see how it all comes together. And I wanted to show this bit from the last page with more Adventures of Superman panel and the acquiring super strength piece as well. This is another one training you to become a Superman. Which brings us to Action Comics number 7, December of 1938. We begin this issue with a guy named Curly messing with Clark Kent. Lois is PO'd that he doesn't do anything about it. So a little more on the character of Superman / Clark Kent and on Lois Lane and their relationship. The heart of the story is the circus. I think just about every superhero, pulp hero, B-movie programmer from this period does the bit with the crook trying to buy out a circus. Even the Monkees did one of these in 66 or 67. You would think that circuses were the most valuable things on earth back in those days. If I could just get my hands on a circus, nothing will stop me. This panel just killed me. The clown complaining about the empty seats and this lone voice from the audience. Pipe down and go into your act. It's like, I don't know, Nelson Muntz's great grandpa or something is sitting out there. Well, you could probably guess that Superman, who overheard the crooks threatening the circus owner, decides to get in on the act, hey, just like in that Monkees episode. But the owner thinks he's a burglar, so he pulls a gun, Supes handles it, and becomes the circus's new strongman. And Lois, sob sister of the Daily Star, comes a-running. What, you might ask, is a sob sister? The definition, a journalist, especially a woman, employed as a writer or an editor of sob stories. In other words, people crying about where they are in life. So in these early stories, Lois is not a star reporter, but she has that ambition, which is why she goes out on a limb for stories. She's trying to prove herself. Really, actually kind of a cool concept. Well, naturally, Superman puts on an amazing show to a packed house. The crooks decide to start staging accidents to drive the crowds away, and Lois decides to conceal herself in Superman's dressing room. Well, that night, the crooks sneak in, kick a dog, kidnap Lois. The next day, they let a lion loose in the circus, and Superman has to intervene. Want to play, huh? He then scares a confession out of one crook and rushes across town, where he captures the rest of the crooks and rescues Lois. Hopefully, he beat the crap out of one of them for kicking a dog. This is a pretty basic story, but it reinforces the relationships between Clark, Superman, and Lois. Gives you a little bit of action. You get the idea here. Action Comics number 8, January of 1939. Okay, this is the big story for me. It's the reason for the subtitle I used on this video. And we also get some continuity, as the next issue will reference what happens in this one. So to begin, Clark is attending a trial. A poor lad from the slums. He and his pals have been stealing for somebody else. This requires some investigation as Superman, so he goes to this guy, Gimpy's hideout, but he misses the kids. He roughs Gimpy up a bit, and then dashes off to stop the kids from getting into trouble. Superman saves the kids from being arrested, and by that I mean he actually breaks them out of the police wagon. Now, we're used to thinking, again, of Batman as a vigilante, but Superman is way outside the law here, And he's going to go much further outside the law before he's through. When the kids find out that Gimpy was going to betray them, they spill everything to Superman. Gimpy, overhearing, takes a shot at one of the kids, which Superman intercepts, and I love the art in that panel. That is absolutely fantastic. Well, Superman decides that it's not entirely the kids' fault that they're thieving. They're from the slums. But what should he do? And then he gets an idea. When a hurricane flattened cities in Florida, the government rushed in aid and rebuilt them with modern housing projects. Oh boy. Superman decides to become a natural disaster. He passes around the word to evacuate the slums and then begins tearing them apart. The army is sent in to stop the destruction, so Superman fights the army. Well, ultimately, he wins. So essentially, he declares war on the United States of America, destroys several blocks of Cleveland, and hopefully everybody actually got out, and hopefully no soldiers were killed in action. And magically, the projects are constructed in a few weeks, and everyone lives happily ever after. So note, Superman is now a wanted man, which will be followed up, like I said, in next issue. It would have actually been kind of cool if Batman, early on, was sent off to apprehend this man of tomorrow. But unfortunately, he didn't exist yet. So this is a story that is very much of his time. Slums are responsible for juvenile delinquency. We see this well into the 1960s. And this led to the destruction of many old neighborhoods to be replaced by the projects, which at the time was thought this is going to solve everything. Well, if you watch TV and movies in the 1970s, you kind of know what the projects ultimately became. But, you know, the writers were young and they had a lot of idealism. And frankly, people hadn't made these changes yet to know how they were maybe going to work out. But I think it is a really amazing story of Superman just saying, screw it, and just wholesale property destruction and fighting the U.S. Army to do something that he believed was right. Now, of course, in reality, probably wouldn't have worked out that well. Those buildings that he destroyed, that land is still owned by the original owners. They might say, well, good, I'm glad those slums are gone. Now I can just build something better. Building those things would have taken probably more than a few weeks. I kind of do some work in this area. And I would say apartments like that, they're going to take maybe a couple years to build. So where are all those people going to live in the meantime? Okay, it's not realistic, but it shows you Superman's attitude towards justice and doing what he believes is right, no matter what. Action Comics, number 9, February of 1939. So following up from last issue, Superman is a wanted criminal, and Cleveland sends for Chicago's best cop, Captain O'Reilly, to bring him in. This story is more comical than anything else. Well, we have a scene where O'Reilly cows the meek Clark Kent, which just sets Lois off again. I absolutely loathe you. And it turns out she loves someone else, Superman. Again, firmly establishing the triangle. And this is, you know, actual world and character building that we're getting here. It's going to last for decades. But of course, Clark takes the whole thing pretty well. Another moment, and I couldn't have suppressed it any longer. He's just laughing his butt off at Lois Lane. By the way, I kind of dig that with this Clark. He's he can be kind of a smartass, honestly. Well, O'Reilly decides to put out a $5,000 reward for Superman's capture, and Mortimer Snoop reads about it and gets some ideas. And by the way, this would be about, $115,000 in today's dollars. At the same time, the news goes out of a mental patient attempting suicide. Superman rushes to the scene. Unfortunately, Mortimer sees him change into his costume. He rushes off to call O'Reilly and collect the reward. While this goes on, Superman arrives in the nick of time to stop the leaping mental patient from hitting the pavement. Compare that maybe to the Incredibles. It works out better for Superman than it did for Mr. Incredible. So O'Reilly is going to wait for Superman to return for his normal clothes, and he's going to cheat Snoop out of the reward money in the process. Yeah, he's definitely a 1930s Chicago police officer. Lois ends up getting involved, and in the end, catching Superman proves to be a little tougher than Wylie and Snoop imagined. It's a cute story. It's nothing spectacular, but it does establish that Superman is definitely wanted by the law for what he did when he destroyed a good portion of Cleveland. Action Comics number 10, March of 1939. Well, we're on issue number 10, and Superman is starting to come together. Note the pose here, which will be used on the cover of Superman number 1, which at the time was just intended to be a single-shot compilation magazine printing old material. It was so well received that it became an ongoing series. If you look at the cover of Superman number 1, there's no number 1 on it. That's because it wasn't supposed to be a number 1. This story involves torture in a prison. Walter Crane, an inmate, escapes and tells the story to Clark Kent, who reports on it in the Daily Star. When the governor of that state investigates the prison, it was run by his old friend, Superintendent Wyman. Wyman claims it's all a lie, but the man he was just flogging dies. And he knows he has to get a hold of the squealer, Crane, if he's going to avoid being punished. Wyman confronts Kent about harboring a fugitive, so he turns Crane in. Lois hates him even more now because of this, and his editor is going to fire him. But obviously, Clark Kent, Superman, has a plan. Wyman can't be convicted without evidence. Clark is going to go down to the prison and catch Wyman in the act on film. So Clark gets himself arrested and thrown into prison, where he toys with the cruel guards. And in the meantime, Crane decides to escape again. This time he encounters Quicksand, oh yes, Quicksand, and Superman has to save him. Superman finally locks Wyman up in his own torture cell and then rushes off to kidnap the governor and bring him to the prison to hear Wyman's confession, which Superman gets under duress. It's a comic book, folks. Don't get too hung up on the legalities, but it still shows Superman as a man above the law, fighting for justice, but doing so in a way that we wouldn't necessarily associate with the Superman of later years. Action Comics number 11 from April of 1939. This is actually, there's not much to this one. It's another well-worn chestnut of crime shows and books, a phony investment scam that leads to a ruined man's suicide. By the way, as a kid's comic, we've already gotten a couple suicides in it, or attempted. Well, naturally, Superman investigates, puts things as right as he can. It's not a great story, not a bad story, and mostly good illustration of the fact that Golden Age Superman was primarily taking on, like I said, normal human beings, not monsters and supervillains. Also notice the whole wanted by the law thing has sort of disappeared by this point. I guess the law decided that catching Superman was just going to be too damn much trouble. Well, that brings us to Action Comics number 12 from May of 1939, rounding out Superman's first year in publication. Here we have another Superman taking the law into his own hands story. We get property destruction. We get assault on an innocent man. Get ready, folks, when Superman takes on reckless driving. Superman is tired of people dying needlessly in car accidents, and he's tired of crooked cops not enforcing the laws against bad driving. So he decides to announce over the air that he's going to take things into his own hands, and in doing so, commits completely unjustified assault against the owner and the MC at WVUX radio. I mean, he probably could have just, knocked on the door and told the guy what his plan was. Instead, he just busts through, slams the guy in the face. Not the Superman that we're used to. Later Superman would just not do that. So step one in his plan, he demolishes all the cars in an impound lot so they won't be available to the owners to commit another crime on the road. So here's some pretty big time property destruction. Of course, some of these cars might also have been there because of parking violations. Who knows what? Maybe the car had been stolen and it was in the impound lot until it was doesn't matter. When you're Superman, you can do whatever the hell you want. So then he does the same to a used car lot that sells dilapidated old clunkers. Then he goes after a drunk driver. Now, I don't really have a problem with that per se. And then a hit and run driver, or hit skip driver, as they put it. Maybe that was the phraseology back then. And finally, he goes after an auto manufacturer who uses inferior parts, which would be like pretty much all of them now, if we're being honest, and destroys his factory, putting all of his employees out of work. So Superman is just not real big on consequences here. Well, finally, he kidnaps the mayor of Cleveland, which, by the way, would have been Harold Hitz Burton at the time, and shows him how serious the problem really is. And wouldn't you know it, in the end, Clark Kent gets a parking ticket because the mayor's cracking down on this kind of thing. Wah, wah, wah. All right. And by the way, who's that mysterious-looking fellow there in the corner? Yes, Batman is on his way, and the two pillars of DC Comics are going to be established. Well, there you go, folks. A somewhat different character than we're going to see later on in the series, when he becomes a little bit more law and order, won't ever step out of line and do the wrong thing. We have watched him over these 12 issues, well, frankly, just kind of bully his way through all sorts of different folks to achieve what he believes is right. Now, of course, he's Superman, and his sense of justice is actually pretty good, but if he wasn't, well, there's your evil Superman. There's your Justice Lord, like you got in the old Justice League cartoons. Property destruction, assault. He throws a guy a pretty far distance, which is probably, when you get down to it, murder. But I mean, again, it was a torturer, so you kind of understand. But no trial, judge, jury, and executioner. That's Superman. He's really more of a vigilante than the Batman character of the time, who, yes, what he's doing is vigilantism, but he does try to stay generally within the confines of the law. There are some accidental deaths in the early Superman ones, but he's not aiming to go out and commit acts of murder as revenge on the criminal element. He seriously just wants to get out there and stop other people suffering from crime. Superman is all about establishing, well, a better world, and he's just, there's nothing that's going to stand in his way when he thinks he knows what needs to be done. Different take on the character than we're used to, and one that might surprise a lot of people who really just think he is a big blue Boy Scout. Well, let me know what you think of Superman. Maybe what's your favorite version of the character, because there have been quite a few now at this point over the last, well, where are we at? Damn near 100 years, we're going on 90 years of Superman. Let me know what you think, and let me know what you think of that first year of Superman's existence. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, maybe think of subscribing, sharing with a friend. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Read some Superman. In fact, if you go to your local comic shop, you might still be able to pick up a facsimile edition of Action Comics #1 on newspaper in the actual size it would have been back in the day. Very cool little piece. And, maybe go watch the Superman movie and see what James Gunn's take is on the character. But hopefully I'll see you again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.